All right, everyone, welcome here to the Gettysburg battlefield. We are here with Wayne Motz, the CEO, President and CEO of Gettysburg Foundation. He is one of the guests on the show for Clio the Muse Season 3 that is being released today, right now, when we're doing a celebratory event here at the Gettysburg battlefield, where I got my start at age 19 as an intern and later on as a park ranger, doing tours all over the battlefield. And one of the first people that I met in my first summer, who's become a mentor of mine and was one of my inspirations in the 18 years since, is Wayne Motz. So it means a lot to me to be here with you today.
Thanks, Rafi. I appreciate it. Glad to have you back on a beautiful, everybody, what a wonderful fall day here on the Gettysburg National Military Park and on the Gettysburg battlefield.
So to kick it off, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have Zandra come on from Zandra TV Network, of course, the head of Zandra TV Network, where Clio the Muse show is on. She's going to do a quick preview of Season 3 with a video that she has to kick us off to see what's coming with Season 3 that is going to be launching today. And we'll come back and do a quick tour of the Gettysburg battlefield. Zandra, take it away.
See you in a minute.
Thank you, Rafi. Now listen, you know I just can't show a video. First of all, I have to celebrate you because you have absolutely coined yourself as the celebrity historian. Man, you got more TV interviews on ABC, NBC, everybody see. I'm like, you're everywhere on TV, which is just a testament to if you work it, it'll work. And that's what you're doing. And so we're just so pleased to have you as one of our producers. Now, I'm gonna share our premiere of the upcoming season 3, which is already live on Zandra TV. So now let me tell you how to go look at it after this is all done. If you have Roku, Amazon, or Apple at your home, you can download the Zandra TV channel. You know how to add a channel, add the channel. If you don't have any of those devices, we made a way for you. Go to ZandraTV.com and check out this series. When I tell you, he has some amazing guests, I'm like, okay, it's just gonna be epic. It's epic. I know, right, Brandon? It's epic. So I'm going to share my screen and I am going to show you a premiere of his show. Here we go.
Welcome to Clio the Muse TV, where we surprise, provoke, and inspire so you can challenge the present by inquiring the past.
And as we were rehabbing the building, it had this old growth pine. Well, if you can imagine, like when you're trying to make all the floors match, we can't go out and buy 200-300-year-old pine trees, cut down pine, because they don't exist anymore.
With your expertise, what's the difference between psychiatry and psychology?
Yeah. So the difference between psychiatry and psychology is, well, we use the same book, but I'm a doctor. I went to medical school. I have an MD, or you can have a DO.
And in the invitation was a packing list, and it said to bring a very warm sleeping bag, of which you did not.
Some of us did not.
Yes.
I was freezing historian before celebrity historian.
What I notice in myself, and then I notice with my clients, is that sometimes it's difficult to be able to combine our roles as wives, mothers at home, and our dreams to become successful entrepreneurs.
And then one of the stories, which is not in the book, but it's one of my favorites that I found recently, is a man that fought with George Armstrong Custer. Of course, he's 23 years old. He's the youngest Union general in the Battle of Gettysburg.
And most people don't realize Custer was at Gettysburg before Little Bighorn.
Right.
Now, what about Albert Einstein? I think of him when I think of this stuff. So what's his tie to the eclipses?
That's very interesting to me. So the eclipse, once people read his paper, they realized they could use the solar eclipse to determine whether or not his theory was right.
How did you get to LA?
I used to be a model. So, yes.
Model in LA, imagine that.
It was a long time ago when I was young and attractive. So
I know, you're on the dessert stage of life, as I would say. And so, why
Oh, now
are
you didn't
you?
tell me. Okay, wait a minute. Now I'm on the dessert stage of life. Oh, that sounds like that's the last serving. Is that the last serving of this meal?
It's when the sun is starting to set.
Oh, you crazy.
And y'all remember, she's a wonderful lady, the OG herself, right here on Clio the Muse. Remember, challenge the present by inquiring the past.
All right. Wait a minute. Hold on. You know, something else was trying to play. Rafi, amazing season. You're the only producer that has produced 2 seasons in 1 year. Season 2, and it was epic. Brandon, you were epic. All of y'all were epic on there. Just totally amazing. Thank you so much for putting the hard work and effort into creating a dynamic, wonderful show and to teach history in a very authentic and organic way that people really get it. Like, I love your show. So thank you so much for being an amazing producer and for being the celebrity historian. Peace.
All right, thanks, Zandra. Appreciate it. So we're back on the battlefield here at Gettysburg, and Wayne Motts, President and CEO of the Gettysburg Foundation. Wayne, tell us about where we're standing here on the Gettysburg battlefield.
Well, Rafi, thanks a lot again for having me here. I really appreciate it. And what a beautiful fall day it is here at Gettysburg at the National Military Park. We are on the second day's battlefield for July 2nd, 1863, and we're on the farm of Peter Trossel. And his son, Abraham Trossel, and wife, Catherine, and their 9 children occupied this, at least up to the battle, and then they fled. And this is right in the heavy action for July 2nd, 1863. Now, we got cars going by. We're on the tour route. We picked a spot on the tour route, so we're going to have cars going by, probably people walking by, so the audience can see this is a real place.
That's
here
right.
on July 2nd. We're not sitting in some studio
That's right.
out here for July 2nd, 1863. So this is a 134-acre farm during the time of the battle, and it was right in the eye of the storm for July 2nd, 1863.
Now, tell me a little bit about the battle in a larger context. So this battle is 3 days, right? July 1, 2, and 3 in 1863. And when you say the second day's battle, this is the heart of the action on day 2 of the battle, right?
Right.
And if you all look, there's a second camera labeled Trossel House. And if you look at that Trossel House, that is actually right next to us off this frame on that other frame. So you see the house and the barn behind us. So tell us about the Trossel property that's here. What happened here during the battle? Specifically, how did the Trossel family engage, what happened to the Trossel farm, I should say? And that's a hole up there that I see in that barn. So tell me about that hole that's in the barn.
It sure is. So here at where we're at here on the Gettysburg battlefield on July 2nd, this place is right in the eye of the storm. It's right in the middle of the action for July 2nd. I am on an artillery piece that belonged to Captain Bigelow, the 9th Massachusetts Independent Battery here, Rafi. And these cannons tried to hold off a Confederate assault, which is off to the left of where the view is, where everybody is right now. And on July 2nd, the Confederates came from the left of that view over here to where we're at here on the right of the view and attacked this artillery battery. And unfortunately, many of the horses killed or wounded, many of the men killed or wounded, trying to hold off this Confederate attack for July 2nd, 1863. Now, the Trossel family fled. They left here. They didn't return here until after the fighting was over. The fighting ended on July 3rd. They came back several days later, and of course, they're going to find their farm, which is, their livelihood, in complete shambles here for July 2nd, 1863. And they put a claim in for about $2,500 worth of damages here. And as far as we know, they didn't get compensated for any of the damages here on the property. And in 1899, it will be sold to the Gettysburg National Military Park. And we at the Gettysburg Foundation are the partner to the Gettysburg National Military Park. And we're helping the park right now with a study to try to be a guide to rehabilitate this property called the Historic Structures Report. We have raised money. We at the Gettysburg Foundation are generous donors in partnership with the Gettysburg National Military Park to help rehabilitate this particular site and to keep it the way it was back in 1863.
That's really cool to me because this is something I try to emphasize on the show with your episode on it and here now on the battlefield. Guys, this is actual cannon. This is like the real thing that you're looking at. That is an actual hole in the barn that's still there from the battle in 1863. These are real buildings. The house you see in the other frame is actually, that's right next to me, is actually the original home. So these were here at the time of the battle. And not only did they, at the time, of course, experience losses that you described, but now we try to protect them. These take effort. These take decades and decades of effort. It takes money. It takes management. So these sites don't just naturally exist. These are things that, these are places that we have to take care of and work on. And this site, you give me context, of course, we're in this spot, but tell me bigger picture. How big is the Gettysburg battlefield?
So the Gettysburg battlefield is under the National Park Service auspices is about 6,000 acres, and we're on 134 acres of it, Raph. Right. So it's a huge, massive area. It's about a 5 by 5 mile block, if you can imagine that. And then during the time of the battle, over the 3 days, about 168,000 men fought here at Gettysburg, and some 51,000 were killed, captured, or wounded here in 3 days. Just in the area where we're at, thousands of soldiers from the Union and Confederate Army were killed, wounded, or captured fighting here on July 2nd. July 2nd was the bloodiest 3 days at Gettysburg, and there were over 21,000 casualties, men killed, wounded, or captured here in a single day. In a single day at the Battle of Gettysburg.
Unbelievable. People don't realize the scale if they haven't been here. That's why you got to come here. And when you come here, you know, it's free to go throughout the battlefield, you know, so you can come here and check it out. But here's what's really fascinating to me. It's so big, it takes time to get through. I worked here for 6 or 7 summers, and even I was constantly learning new things. So when you come here, you want to spend a couple of days easily to get a sense of what's going on. It's also beautiful. Now, the thing to consider there is that sometimes, you know, when I was working here, people would come and they would kind of expect a battlefield almost like, you know, a football field or something like that. Like they would just think, oh, where can I just go see the whole thing? You're in it, you know what I mean? And it wasn't a bar fight. You know, it wasn't a bar fight with 10 people. It was 170,000 people that we're talking about. And the casualties, you know, you're talking about of the 50,000 plus casualties, more than 10,000, maybe about 11,000 are killed or mortally wounded, which means they died as a result of the battle. I want to give you guys a sense here for scale, all right? Because there's a reason it's the bloodiest battle in American history or in North American history. Vietnam, over the course of about 15 years, we lost 50 some odd thousand people. Here, you lost about a fifth of that in 3 days. So think about how bloody this battle really is. It's tremendous to think about. And it gave me a lot of perspective to spend my early adult years here at the Gettysburg battlefield, because it puts into context, one, that, you know, there's a lot of sacrifice that's been done in the history of the country that allows us to have some of the things that we have today, including the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments in the Constitution, and end slavery and expand the right to vote, and many of the things that have come since. And it also gives me perspective on time. It always gave me a perspective to be here on a battlefield where so many young men died, that time is finite. It can end at any point, and it affects how you appreciate what you have around you. And that's what I call historical perspective that transcends any particular site. But a site like this helps deliver, I think, better than virtually anywhere else. Certainly not unsurpassed.
And Rafi, when we talk about the sacrifices made, we also have to think about the families here. So this is just one farm. There were many farms on the Gettysburg battlefield. There were 2,400 residents of the town at the outbreak of the Civil War. Many of them have to flee during the fighting. There's property damage there. There's a loss of one civilian who was killed, several other wounded. So there's a sacrifice when it comes at many levels, not just the level of the soldiers that are here. And we also have to understand there's a tremendous casualties of animals here. Mrs. Trossel said that there were over 100 dead horses on her property. And many of those horses were horses that belonged to Bigerow's 9th Massachusetts Battery to pull these pieces of artillery we think we had about 5,000 horses killed here. So when you talk about the number of men killed here, there's a terrific sacrifice of animals here as well. Devastating and very hard for most people to wrap a frame around. It's up to us here at the Gettysburg Foundation, partnering with the National Park Service, to help preserve and interpret these sites. And the Park Service has a huge responsibility here, and it takes time, effort, it takes money related to that. We've got a lot of great folks that are generous donors to help us. So if I could put in GettysburgFoundation.org, go to www.GettysburgFoundation.org. You can join our efforts. You can be a member here. You can help us with that. And then when you plan your visit, not only go to GettysburgFoundation.org, but you can go to www.nps.gov/get, GETT. And that's the National Park Service's website. Go to it and see all the surrounding things and areas here on the battlefield. And let's also include Eisenhower National Historic Site. President Eisenhower retired here, got Eisenhower's home here as well, which can be toured. So there's just a lot of great preservation, a lot of great history, and you could spend days. We're only spending a few minutes out here on July.
To give you all an idea, when I was here in the summers that I worked here, I gave about 30 different programs that I created and delivered over the course of those summers. We created our own programs. Of course, you had to get approval. So I'm not here saying that, I don't know, that someone that King Tut from ancient Egypt was hanging out at Gettysburg. I mean, you can't be saying factually incorrect information. But we created our own programs. And that tells you, though, gives you an idea of just how much is possible here. Because, again, 30 different programs in one site, and other people had more. You touched on the National Park Service and the foundation. So for our folks here, can you tell me what's the difference and what's that relationship like? Elaborate a little bit. So this site is a National Park Service site.
That's correct.
But there's foundation partners. Tell me that. What's that about?
So the Gettysburg National Military Park and Eisenhower National Historic Site, these are government units under the Department of Interior, of course, under the National Park Service, that really controls the area here, sees to its preservation and interpretation. And we are the philanthropic nonprofit partner to help the park. And when we say help, what does that mean? We own and operate the main visitor center for the park. And of course, we raise money for different projects related, like the Historic Structures Report funding, which we just raised for the Trossel Farm, which is the house in the frame that you have on the other image. So our job is to support them and also tell the significance, of course, of these places. We're a nonprofit 501c3 charity, Rafi, since you asked that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that charity is important to provide funding to do projects that the National Park Service isn't doing or doesn't have enough funding for, or any of those that you're coming in and supporting. And that visitor center that you talk about, a museum, the best Civil War museum in the country, I think. It covers the entire Civil War, causes during the war and aftermath. It's really a wonderful place to come and just learn about the Civil War and then come out to this very significant battlefield of Gettysburg. You also have the cyclorama painting in there, which there's only a handful of those types of paintings in the world. Guys, this is 300 plus feet long, multiple stories tall, and it's 360 degrees around you. So it's basically a predecessor to a motion picture. And so this it was a painting in the 1880s, I want to say.
That's right. That's right.
And so it's just soon before you have motion picture, but it was sort of, think of it as you might go experience it like a movie back then. And now you kind of can see, well, of course, it's trying to depict a significant event in the world history. And they had many of them depicting different things. Of course, this one being Gettysburg, now it rests here. But you can go there and experience it the way that they did by going to the visitor center. So again, just so much cool stuff here that's right here on the battlefield. I get so excited about it, and it's free or inexpensive to do. So it's really cool, really easy. Now, tell me this real quick, because you were touching on the Park Service and the foundation. What are a couple other examples of foundation projects that take place? Because I like people to understand what are the kinds of things we do to preserve these places, the stories that we're talking about?
Well, one of them right now, the biggest one, I think it's the most impactful project that's been done at the Gettysburg National Military Park in the history of the park, and that's the rehabilitation of Little Round Top. Little Round Top, of course, an iconic hill, saw heavy fighting on July 2nd, 1863 at the southern end of the battlefield. And the National Park Service is undergoing, it's closed about 18 months right now. And the Park Service is putting in pathways, rehabilitating the areas around it where the roadway is. And so that's huge. The contract, I think, is around, don't hold me to all this, I think it's around $11 million. And of course, the Gettysburg Foundation raised $3.2 million of that number, thanks to our generous donors to assist them on that project. But Little Round Top was in need of help because it's basically been loved to death. It's the most visited spot, millions of people on it since 1863. And to try to conjugate groups there, to try to park up there, all of these, of course, are problematic. So the park is undergoing that right now. So that's probably the biggest example of a very large project going on right now.
And you mentioned the historic structure report right here at the Trussell home that we have in the other frame. What's the importance of the historic structure report? Why does that matter?
That is a base report that tells about the history of the home and then allows the Park Service to have a blueprint to go on to rehabilitate it. So it's the base document to start for a blueprint to help rehabilitate.
So you can't do the preservation of that building without having it.
You got to have that study first. You got to have that study first. And we're raising money to help the park get funding for that study because, as you know, for a lot of donors, it's not sexy to raise money for a plan or something like that. But it's a necessary step to see to the rehabilitation of this very important historic home here on July 2nd, 1863.
Of which there are many. So that's just one example. I know. So speaking of historic buildings and the structure and preserving, I want to put on next Brandon Dempsey, who is also a guest on the show. When you go watch the season and you see multiple episodes, one episode features Wayne Motz. Of course, we have 9 episodes. Another episode features Brandon Dempsey, who's coming in from St. Louis, has done wonderful work with an old schoolhouse there in St. Louis. So I want to give him the floor to give you a preview for about 10 minutes or so to walk you through what he's done there, so you get a sense, so you can watch that episode later. In the meantime, Wayne and I are going to run to another stop and come back to you from another site on the Gettysburg battlefield. We'll see you soon. Take it off, Brandon.
All right, thanks, Rafi. So I am standing in what is literally the oldest still standing St. Louis City public school, could be argued one of the oldest still standing schools west of the Mississippi. So we bought this building in January of 2020. It is listed on the National Historic Registrar. It was actually, this building that I'm in was built to educate the children of Irish and mainly German immigrants that were building ironclad battleships on the Mississippi River that's just 5 blocks from us. So we took this building, which had been sitting vacant for years, and as you'll see here, I'm in a giant classroom. We turned this into our bar and our cafe, and then we took and opened it up in a kind of open concept of took 2 classrooms and combined them into one. Because what we wanted to be able to build was a nice cafe and a whole bar and coffee shop so that people can come in here and see the history. Now, what's unique about this building is that I'm going to squat down here. We couldn't do this when we were doing the interview. Is that these are the original hardwood floors from 1871 when this building was built. Now you say, okay, that's not a big deal, Brandon. Why should we care about these beautiful hardwood floors? Well, you should care because it was 6 to 7 layers of flooring on these floors. And we thought, if we're going to be historically accurate, we need to save these floors. So what we did is we took up the 6 to 7 layers of flooring, which was like this high, which means the base, we had to put all new baseboards in, all 26,000 square feet, because obviously there's a huge gap. Well, then there were all these nails, staples, and brads sticking out of the floor. And so we worked and worked until we found somebody who actually helps south of St. Louis, helps different men with mental and other substance abuse challenges, kind of rehab. And we brought them up and they pulled all the nails, staples, and brads one by one out of these floors so that we could save these wood floors. Now you're thinking, okay, maybe you pulled a couple thousand. We actually pulled somewhere between 650 and 750,000 nails, staples, and brads out of these floors so that we could save them. And when we got done pulling them up, well, we were able to come through here and we finish them. Yet over here, when we pulled up this flooring, it was all gone. And Rafi talked a little bit about the wood floors. Well, we wanted to be historically accurate. which means we had to go buy 20-foot beams. I'll turn this way, 20-foot beams of this wood right here. And after we bought these 20-foot beams, it took 6 of our guys to carry them in. We built an entire wood shed and a wood processing piece, and we cut them, we planed them, then we cut them. Show you this. We tongue and grooved them, and then we laid them and finished them down here. And so all of this was built so that we could be historically accurate from a flooring standpoint. Next, we then took all of the chalkboards and we rehabbed all of the chalkboards all the way around the building. So what was unique about this space is it had this historical character, but we had to restore it. And that means that, I don't know if you guys know this, but you can't really buy chalkboard sills anymore. Like people don't, you can't just go to Home Depot and buy a chalkboard sill. So we had to build a wood shop. We had to make these chalkboard sills all the way around, again, just so that it would be all completely historically accurate. So this building now today is a building, when it started in 1871, it was built to educate the children of these primarily German Irish immigrants and teach them how to work in factory jobs. And back in 1871, well, St. Louis City left the school building somewhere in the 1960s, and we've now brought it back and turned it not only into the office for our marketing company, a company called Go Brand Go that works with manufacturing companies, but it is also now a 501c3 nonprofit with a mission of making St. Louis the most collaborative ecosystem around for manufacturing distribution. And so this building now has come back 150 years later. Thank you for the nice comment, but has come back 150 years later to serve the manufacturing distribution industry. Because what we see is that when you serve manufacturing distribution, this is the backbone of the US. This is the second largest employer to healthcare. So healthcare is the largest employer in the US. Second largest employer is manufacturing. And manufacturing, for every one manufacturing person on the floor, it creates 46 additional jobs. So manufacturing is about creating jobs. Manufacturing is about creating, building community. Manufacturing distribution is about saving communities, a lot of our rural communities as well. So when we looked at, hey, how can we play a part in being the change that we want to see, it was saying, hey, let's take a big risk. Let's buy a building. Let's restore that building, and let's launch a nonprofit to really help service the manufacturing and distribution industry. Rafi, I'm looking at my clock. I got a lot more I can keep showing, and I can keep going until you come back on, or I can pause now. I'll pause for just a second. All right, I'm going to show you guys a couple more
Almost
things.
set up, Brandon. So go a couple more minutes, 2 more minutes.
You're good.
Almost set
All
up.
right. So I told you guys about those floors. So one of the things that we were really big on them was, hey, how do we take this building and make it totally energy efficient? How do we have no waste in this building? So I talked about those flooring. So in here, we built these beautiful conference rooms. As you can see that I'm in this beautiful conference room. Well, that flooring I talked about, remember those beams I talked about? There are those beams. So we took those beams and made them table legs for a huge conference table. And then we took this scrap of all our flooring and we built these custom conference tables. So we got 6 of these now all over the building, because we were all about how do we really minimize the amount of waste that's coming into this building. So while it's a very modern building, as you can see with my nice TV and Zoom camera and full Zoom room capabilities and all that stuff, we were really big on how do we keep the history of it, and how do we not only keep the history of it, but how do we reduce the amount of waste and save as much stuff as we could with this overall property. So, I can answer questions. This is fantastic. So how do we rehab the walls and ceilings? So what's funny is, so if you look up, these ceilings are 18 feet tall. So when the painters came through, they gave us the estimate to paint the building. It's 26,000 square feet. They said, yeah, it's going to be about $110,000 to paint. I'm like, $110,000 to paint? That's crazy. They said, well, Brandon, you have 18-foot tall ceilings. Oh, and you're painting the ceiling. I'm like, oh, I guess you're right. So the walls, yes, they are plaster. They are thick. So the walls are 2 feet thick of concrete and plaster. So what we had to do was, one, we did drill into them to figure out what it was, but then we had to go back with concrete and plaster to repair them. And then you'll see all these other drywall walls, temporary stuff that we built in order to create these beautiful conference rooms. Now, the floors I told you the walls are 2 feet thick. The floors are also 2 feet thick. So from the top of one floor, from the floor to the ceiling of the floor beneath me, which again, this is a 3-story building. So that space is 2 feet. So we had to run all of our plumbing and piping and all that kind of stuff in the building in order to create it. Ralph, are you taking over now?
Yeah, I'll take over. We'll have some time for questions right after this one. This is our last segment, and we'll open it up for questions.
All yours, buddy.
Thank you. All right, Wayne, where are we now? And tell me about that second camera we have.
That was the fastest move since the Civil War, from the second day's battle over to the, third day's battle. Take a look at that camera that's in the second frame, not the one that's shooting us.
It says Cemetery Ridge on there.
And it's looking right up Cemetery Ridge to the north. This is the Union position for July 3rd, 1863. And the trees in the background are the target for what we call Pickett's Charge, this massive frontal assault on the 3rd of July. There's also a beautiful monument, looks like the Washington Monument, in the frame. Our camera went down.
Keep going. Keep going. We're on grass here, guys. We're on grass, and a tripod gave out.
Everybody from the ground up right here.
Here we go. We're back. We're back.
So, the image that's in the frame, everybody, the U.S. regular monument, which looks like the Washington Monument, that big shaft that you see there, that was dedicated in 1909, and the Gettysburg Foundation helped give funding to the National Park Service for the rehabilitation of that memorial, Rafi.
Awesome.
Watch the bottom there. Yep.
So to be clear, guys, that other camera that says Cemetery Ridge is looking off to the left here, and we're looking from Cemetery Ridge here. So this right here, you're looking at me, is from the perspective, if you were standing right on that ridge, because that's where we're standing, but looking toward the fields in front of you.
And what's behind us, in front of you, is where the Confederates came from for July 3rd, 1863.
Rafi,
so on the second day, where we were at, the Confederates pushed through there. They had a huge attack at both ends of the Union line. They were close to being successful, but they didn't take really their objective. So that's why we're going to have it July 3rd, everybody, 1863.
Rafi.
Look, we got cars, we got everybody out here.
This is Civil War Disneyland, guys. This is what I say.
Rafi.
This is not even much compared to the summer.
Yeah.
But
Rafi, the
by
Cemetery
way,
Ridge camera is off.
What's that?
The Cemetery Ridge camera
Yeah,
is
I
off.
know the camera's that camera is done, so that's why. So we're fine.
okay.
So we don't. So what's really cool is that that helps me remember is July 1, 2, and 3 is how I remember day 1, day 2, day 3. It happens to match up with the calendar. Right. So on July 2nd, on day 2, we have this event here that this monument is for, right?
This is day 3.
Oh, day 3.
This is day 3.
With the Hancock Wounded Monument.
Right.
Sorry, got
Right.
confused. See, I've been away too long. I already got confused. But now, tell me on July 3rd, on the third day. So as he mentioned, day 2 required a third day of battle. This is when the famous Pickett's Charge happens, one of the biggest events in American history that it lives in lore, right? All kinds of legends and movies about it. So tell me about this wounded marker here.
So the marker that's over here behind us, off to the left of your view, is a monument to General Winfield Scott Hancock. Hancock was a senior Union general. He commanded the troops here in the center of the battlefield for July 3rd. And this July 3rd is when Robert E. Lee decides to make a frontal assault. About 12,500 men and about 6,000 Union defenders defending this ridge. Confederates coming from behind, where Rafi and I are, in front of you, and the Union Army right along this ridge where we're standing here on the afternoon of July 3rd, 1863, preceded by a cannonade that lasted 2 hours. It had over 150 Confederate guns, over 90 Union artillery pieces here. And this cannonade was so loud, you could hear it like it was a thunderstorm, Rafi, down in Baltimore, Maryland. That's 52 miles from where we're standing.
And I want to add something there, there, real quick before we carry on.
Sure.
Now, I'm not generally a big fan of reenactments, and people often think I did reenactments when I came on the battlefield. We don't do reenactments on the battlefield. Those are typically on private property. However, if you go to a small demonstration, or if you do end up at a reenactment, one thing that's valuable is to hear the sound that you just talked about. The amazing thing is they're firing blanks, guys. They're not firing actual ammunition in there. And usually it depends on the exactly what they're doing. They're using about a quarter of the gunpowder in each of those cannon that they were compared to what was actually used. So you're hearing 1/4 of the sound, if you will, from that cannon. Now take that and multiply it by hundreds, for 2 hours. Now you see what we're talking about, why you can hear it 50 miles away. In other words, you've never heard anything even remotely like this. Even when you go to reenact and you think this is loud, it's nothing. And there are accounts on the battlefield of people's ears starting to bleed during the cannonade that we're talking about because of the tremendous cannonade that takes place before the charge. Now, carry back with your story, but I want to give context of how, again, this is not a bar fight. This is a massive event that is taking place.
And most people don't realize that you've got this huge cannonade that's going on, which can be heard over 50 miles. Like you said, that people are going to be damaged for life because of some of these things, just related to the sound. The soldier said after the battle, when it thunderstorms after the battle, and we're out here in the middle of the high grass, everybody.
Yeah.
When it thunderstormed after the battle, that the storm seemed tame compared to the artillery fire that's here. So the monument where we're at, Rafi, for July 3rd, Winfield Scott Hancock, he's got a direct connection to St. Louis, your home, because he married in 1850 a woman named Elmira Russell. She's buried in Bellefontaine Cemetery in St. Louis right now, today. Hancock was a native of Northtown,
Rafi,
graduate of the United States
Danian.
West Point.
I think you
July
met him. He's a
3rd,
Rotarian.
he's going to be
He's
here
at
along
Gettysburg.
this line, controlling all the Union troops that are here. And he's wounded on July 3rd, right where this marker is. He comes back to the battlefield. The marker is dedicated in 1888. He's shot in the thigh. This wound plagues him basically for the rest of his life. He runs for president of the United States, and he dies in 1886. He's born in 1824, but he's badly wounded at the site where we're standing here on July 3rd, 1863. The Union Army will repulse this attack. They will be successful here on July 3rd. The Confederates, unfortunately for the Confederate forces, fortunately for the Union forces, the Confederates will lose tremendous amounts of troops. They'll be repulsed here. So it depends on what side of the equation you're on here. Devastating loss for the Confederates, a win for the Union Army here on July 3rd, wherever the viewers are. And so it's just a tremendous knockdown, drag-out fight here for July 3rd, 1863. Hard to comprehend the level of destruction here.
Totally hard to comprehend. I mean, how many of these markers and monuments are around the battlefield total?
About 1,300.
1,300
markers.
So this is just one. And look at the stories just from this one. You talked about a future presidential candidate.
Right.
You talked about our tie to St. Louis with who he married. Right. And you're talking about, again, one of the legendary, famous events of American history, Pickett's charge here on the bloodiest battle in the 3 days of American and North American history. Again, for those of you who might be coming in and out, more than 50,000 dead, wounded, and captured casualties on this during this battle over the course of 3 days. And we're closing out the third day here with the fields of Pickett's charge and Winfield Scott Hancock wounded marker right here. And again, for some context, as I mentioned earlier, at Vietnam, over 15 years, we had about 50 some odd thousand dead, 58,000 or so. Here at the Battle of Gettysburg in 3 days, of those 50,000 plus casualties, about 10, 11,000 are dead from the battle in 3 days. Gives you a context, again, of the scale, the destroyed properties, which we talked about earlier, and the aftermath. We were talking about the ears and the cannonade that took place and the damage that took place. And of course, just one marker here can tie to so many different stories. Now, I know we see this marker, but on the right side of your frame here, you see a red property there.
Right.
Tell me about that red property, Wayne.
That's the farm that belonged to farmer Nicholas Cadori during the time of the battle. He rented it, and there was a renter inside it. And it had a lot of activity, especially on July 3rd, because it was near this farm, probably on the other side of it, just west of it, where George Pickett, the namesake, of course, for Pickett's charge, George Pickett, his Virginia troops were the troops involved in it. He is right near where the Nicholas Cadori farm is, and it was a target point. And during the battle, the barn was white. The house is original. It's got an addition on it. The barn was built after 1882, Rafi. But once again, another historic property here on the Gettysburg battlefield.
And right in the thick of the action, and we mentioned earlier, you know, there are so many of these historic properties that are right here on the battlefield. What's in them today? How are those used today?
Well, a lot of them are lived in by National Park Service employees and kept there. And so that means that the farms can be kept up. Keep in mind, you just can't leave these things sitting empty.
Then it's an abandoned building.
They use them for park housing in most cases here. So that, and then of course, always trying to rehabilitate the properties around. Luckily for the National Park Service, they've got a partner in us to try to help them do some of these things.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah. These fields were not just famous for Pickett's Charge, but of course, later on, Eisenhower is here as a young cadet. This is Dwight Eisenhower we're talking about. So we have multiple presidential connections here. We talk about Winfield Scott Hancock, who was a presidential candidate who was wounded right here. Now let's fast forward a few decades and go to Dwight Eisenhower before he's president. He's also, when he's here at first, a future presidential candidate, not yet president, right? So when he's here on these very fields, what's he doing? What's he up to?
Yes, so these very fields were the site of what we call Camp Colt, which was a tank training center during the time of World War I. The President Eisenhower.
When was World War I approximately?
1914 to 1918.
So we're talking a few decades later.
But America's entry is 1917.
Yes.
To the surrender in 1918. 1914 to 1918, the First World War. President Eisenhower is a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point in the class of 1915. And that class came to Gettysburg battlefield. We have photographs of the president in that class, studied it. Then he came back as a young officer to command Camp Colt, the training center. He did not go overseas to France during the First World War. He is actually here. And there were tank training all out here, officers' quarters out here, other structures. The swimming pool for Camp Colt was right off the right of where the frame is that they're standing. Because why? Why are they doing that on what is the Gettysburg National Military Park battlefield? Because it was under the auspices of the War Department. Gettysburg was created as a national military park in 1895. And it went to the Department of Interior in 1933. It was under the auspices of the United States War Department in 1917, 1918, when you have this World War I facility here.
And the War Department is today the Defense Department. So the Defense Department, in today's language, but back then known as the War Department, was running this battlefield. Of course, it was not nearly as big at the time, right? Of course, the battle is the battle. But the protected property was not nearly as expansive at the time, right?
Right. It's grown over the. Of course, it's grown over
because of efforts
over
with the foundation and the National Park Service,
American Battlefield Trust.
American
we can name a lot of groups.
Try to acquire the properties over time to try to restore this. So once again, like we were talking about earlier in a different context, these are always active efforts. They were doing this while I was here in the 2000s. This is still always going on. Not just acquiring key pieces of property, but restoring the buildings, the landscapes. Telling me there was a swimming pool here. That swimming pool was not there anymore. So this landscape is always living. There's always stuff that has been done to it, that is continuing to be done to it. And so these are part of the efforts. Now, one effort I remember when I was here over the course of the years that I was here from 2004 to 2010 is that we restored historic tree lines, because what happened is when the farms were here, they used a lot of that timber for fencing, firewood, etc. So it was not as wooded as what later became. This is very common in national parks, even at Yellowstone. It's the same idea. When you have less, when you kind of remove the regular human activity, now it starts to grow in stronger. Well, then this battlefield had been overgrown. And it was difficult to understand certain parts of the battlefield because it was, you were looking at a wall of trees when it was a field at the time of the battle, so you couldn't see what they could see. Well, part of the restoration in that situation was restoring historic tree lines, cutting the trees and clearing tree lines so that it was approximately what it was in 1863. So you can come here and understand it. So that's another example of the kind of restoration that takes place. In that case, landscape preservation beyond the building. So you understand the battlefield that is here. Now tell me more about Eisenhower, because Eisenhower on this altered landscape, and there's a photo, if you watch the show in his episode with Wayne Motz, there's a photo of Eisenhower in front of a tank during the training. So you will see this stuff if you watch the show. Actual primary source material. Clio the Muse, the show, obviously for season 3, releasing today. But Eisenhower, that wasn't the end of Eisenhower here, right? No. They're altering the landscape with those tanks, but what's going on afterwards? What happened?
So Eisenhower loves this place so much, and Mamie Eisenhower loves this place so much, that they decide to buy a home. So in 1950, they buy just west of the Gettysburg battlefield, the Allen Redding Farm. They actually rehabilitate it, restore it, and that becomes the presidential retirement home. And obviously the president doesn't know he's going to be president, so he gets this property. He wants it to be his retirement home, and it's actually used extensively. He'll come here while he's president, and then he'll retire permanently when he ends his presidency, of course, in 1961, after the 1960 election. He and Mrs. Eisenhower will reside on that farm until his death in 1969. He dies in Washington, D.C. Of course, he is buried in Kansas, and Mrs. Eisenhower will live in the farm property until 1979. But in 1967, they joint willed it, life estate, so to speak, to the federal government, and it was opened up as a historic site in 1980, after her death in 1979. You can go visit the Eisenhower farm today, just like the Eisenhowers left it. Check the website that's on there. And so that's the presidential retirement home right here. Of course, Eisenhower, a frequent visitor, very knowledgeable about the battle. And if we'd have been here in the 50s, we might see the president on tour here with Montgomery, or in the 60s or later on with a lot of dignitaries. Yeah, he was on the battlefield all the time. Very knowledgeable about the place. Very well liked here in Gettysburg as well. Attended the local Presbyterian church. One of the battlefield guys was his minister here at the Presbyterian church.
Not long ago.
And actually did the funeral when Ike Maney passed away.
Oh wow! Yeah. You were?
Not me.
Oh,
I'm talking about Robert McCaskill. Robert McCaskill.
Yeah,
no, I was in the first Boy Scout troop to go through the Eisenhower farm in 1980 after it was opened up. But Robert McCaskill, who was a longtime licensed battlefield guide here at Gettysburg National Military Park, as well as a Presbyterian minister of the Gettysburg Presbyterian Church, when the Eisenhowers passed away, he did their funeral.
Wayne, you touched on it. I'm going to mention this. You're not just the CEO of the Gettysburg Foundation. You're also a licensed battlefield guide. What does that mean?
Well, I've been a licensed battlefield guide 34 years. I'm honored to be that. I'm on leave.
How old were you when you became licensed?
21.
21 years old. You know how hard that exam is to pass? It is a really difficult license to get, and this guy passed it when he was 21 years old.
I was 19 when I took the written test. I was a month past my 21st birthday when I was licensed. I was still honored to be here. The battlefield guides are licensed and tested by the federal government. There's a code of federal regulations that sets them up. That's administered by the National Park Service. It's a very difficult examination. It's both oral and written, and they have been guiding on this battlefield license since 1915. There's been battlefield guides guiding here since 1863, the moment the guns closed, because people came back looking for their relatives. And of course, when you look at the GettysburgFoundation.org, you look at the National Park Service website, which I gave to you. The best way to see the battlefield, I'm biased, but the best way to see the battlefield is to get a license guide to go with you in your car and answer questions. You know, all these applications are great. They're great to have if you want to go out on your own and explore the battlefield. But one thing they can't do is answer questions, and they can't react to that. So getting a license guide, it's such a great service here on the Gettysburg National Military Park battlefield. And I'd highly encourage any of you.
It's the ultimate way, because when you come here, you can hire a guide to come in your car, take you around the battlefield, give you an overview, emphasize the areas or the state that you want to emphasize, answer questions like you talked about. And there you go into the National Park Service Visitor Center for that. I would do that. And then I would also do some park ranger programs, which are on specific areas of the battlefield. No park ranger does a whole tour. They do specific areas of the battlefield. And that's what I do as a park ranger. So you have us two, it's the ultimate team.
You got to get on the park website and check that, because the rangers have programs, regular programs,
free of charge.
Free of charge during season. So I would encourage everybody, start at the Museum and Visitor Center. Check the websites that we gave, GettysburgFoundation.org, www.nps.gov/get, GETT.
And what about the Eisenhower site?
Yeah, I knew you were going to.
I think it's nps.gov/EISE.
I think that's what it is. I think that's what it is. Good. You got it.
As an Eisenhower, EISE. Come on.
Now I'm going to get done.
I was just looking at it, so it's unfair. It's unfair.
Yeah. So be sure to go over to Eisenhower, and you usually have to take a shuttle over there. That's in season. Because parking's limited. Parking's limited over there.
It's a protected property.
I know we got to wrap up, Rafi, but there's so many different things to see. Check the websites and explore, plan your visit before you come see us. Then 6,000 acres of property out here. We've just been on 2 days of it here.
And we didn't even get to Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, which is just you know, a few hundred yards from me in the National Cemetery. That is the result of so many dead people here, so much casualties here at the battlefield. Of course, within months after the battle, Abraham Lincoln, Edward Everett, who was actually the main speaker of the event for 2 hours, but Lincoln did the closing remarks in 2 minutes, and the Gettysburg Address, that's when he delivered it. And there was no microphones, much like us today. We don't have a microphone on. And so you can imagine with hundreds of people at the event, a lot of people didn't hear it right. There's a lot of different accounts of the Gettysburg Address in the contemporary newspapers at the time, but we know the real script and you can check it out. You can just Google it, it'll come up. I think it's a wonderful speech that really gives meaning to this battle and this war. When he talks about the last full measure of devotion, that's the words that he uses, Lincoln, the last full measure of devotion that these men gave here for what he calls a new birth of freedom that we enjoy today. And then he's talking about ending slavery, and he's talking about a vision for the United States that he drew from the founding fathers that today we continue to apply to many of the American themes. And that's why Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address is so special. So when you come here, you've got to check that out as well. So there's so much to check out. Of course, you can get in touch with me, go to those websites, and you can check it all out. In the meanwhile, we're going to wrap it up for today. You did a quick glimpse of what all is available here, days and days of stuff to do. I spent so many summers here. I still love it. Wayne, thank you so much for coming here. It means a lot to me. Again, he was my inspiration since I was 19 years old, so it means a lot to me.
Thanks. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you. I hope the viewers come because there's so much history here in Gettysburg. And remember what Lincoln said, that these dead shall not have died in vain, right? So that's what this place is about. That sets Gettysburg apart from everything. When the president came here, everybody said, why is Gettysburg different? Because the president comes here. So you've got to include the National Cemetery as part of that.
How many presidents we've talked about already? Eisenhower, Lincoln, the candidate with Hancock, so many here. So we're going to wrap up. We're going to hang out for any questions. Otherwise, we're done with the formal part of the program. Thank you. Check out the Clio the Muse show. I will send a link to you folks after this. It is cliothemuse.tv/watch, but don't worry about remembering it. I will send a link after this at the end. We'll hang out for any questions you have. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
That was so good. Okay, so question number 1 is from Bruce, and he says, what do they do with all of the injured and dead bodies? I think this one is for Wayne.
Go ahead, Wayne.
All right. Well, Bruce, that is an excellent question. And when the armies departed here, they took the wounded that could travel with them. And that's tremendous. But the number I want you to understand is what was left here. And unfortunately, Union and Confederate soldiers left here, 21,000 wounded Union and Confederate soldiers left here. And in a town of 2,400 people, doctors came from all over. Some of the military doctors stayed, but most had to go with the armies. So care of the wounded here, tremendous. And the last wounded soldier doesn't leave here in about 100 temporary hospitals all around this area until November 19, 1863. The day Lincoln spoke, there were still wounded soldiers here in Gettysburg. And then the dead, Union dead, will be reinterred in the National Cemetery at Gettysburg. Some will be taken to their home plots. The Confederate dead, unfortunately, will lay out on the battlefield in temporary shallow graves until 1872, when the Ladies Memorial Aid Society will raise money and have those bodies reinterred. Now, there's no such thing as dog tags in the Civil War. So many of these Union and Confederate bodies that are on the battlefield, even if they were marked by a temporary wooden headboard or something else, in some cases, a lot of cases, I should say, the bodies are unidentified.
That's right. If you go into the National Cemetery, where Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address, that was being created to gather some of the dead. There's about 3,600, if I remember right, that are from the battle that end up in the National Cemetery.
You got a pretty good memory.
So
3,512.
Okay, so 3,512 out of about 10, 11,000 that are that die as a result of the battle. And in there, you will find 900 some odd that are unknown, that is numbered graves. And to me, that's the most powerful part for me of the cemetery, because that's the ultimate last full measure of devotion, the sacrifice that Lincoln talked about. Not only your life, but your identity, who you are. And it's really powerful to be in there. Now, one bit I'll add about the National Cemetery, since we're on it, is it was used as a national cemetery for many decades. Is this still open? Are they still taking folks or not? I'm not sure. But I know they were using it for decades. There's other veterans that are in there.
No, it's been closed for many years. Okay, but if you die, if
Evergreen is what's open.
If you already have a plot, you can still be buried in that.
That's what I'm thinking of. Okay.
And so there are still burials going on.
Yes.
Since 1972, they've closed it for new burials.
But so when you go in there, I don't want you to get confused. There's the original Civil War section,
Right.
and then there's another section with many other veterans of United States wars that are buried there. So it became multiple purposes.
There are men who died D-Day there.
Yes.
There are men, over 100 men killed in Vietnam there. So it's a national cemetery by all sense of the means. And today there are 7,000 bodies in the National Cemetery. That includes a 5-acre annex. So the 17 original acres and the 5-acre annex.
Yeah. And if you want a good book on this, one of my favorites is called Strange and Blighted Land by Gregory Coco. That is about the original question, which is what happened to the dead and wounded afterwards. He mentioned almost 10 times the population of the town is what you have here in Wounded right after the battle. So Strange and Blighted Land by Gregory Coco. You can Amazon it, you'll find it. I'll also include a link in the email that I do in the follow-up so you can have it. But it's a really nice way to look at what happened to the town. Like in our memory, for a lot of regular folks that come through here, the narrative stops on July 3rd or July 4th. Of 1863. But for these guys, it didn't stop for months. It didn't stop for years. And the property damage goes on forever. A lot of bankruptcy gets declared as a result of this too. And one of my favorite buildings is for the field hospitals you're talking about is Schmucker Hall, which of course is a wonderful museum today. And you also have the Spangler Farm and the Spangler Home where the foundation has done a lot of work.
Gettysburg Foundation owns the George Spangler Farm, which is the Union 11th Army Corps Field Hospital. There were about 1,900 wounded soldiers there, Union and Confederate. Richard Nixon's great-grandfather, a soldier here.
Another presidential tie.
In the 73rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry, was mortally wounded on July 2nd. She died at the Spangler Farm, and he is buried in the National Cemetery, Gettysburg.
Other questions?
Yes. Jamie asked, are there people still searching grounds for artifacts such as metal detectors, archaeologists, and historians?
People still searching.
Are there people still searching artifacts such as metal detectors and other?
So you're not allowed to relic hunt on the Gettysburg battlefield. That's against federal law. I will say that we do have an archaeologist here. One of the archaeologist's jobs is to go around and determine certain areas related to compliance. They do selected archaeological digs. And in a lot of these digs, finding objects on the battlefield, there are a lot of things learned.
Exactly. 2003-ish, we found some human remnants in the
There were human
cut.
remains found along the railroad cut. I can't remember the exact date of it.
2000 somewhere. So
been a
it does happen, but it is important that it's not legal to come in and relic hunt as a public, because remember the mission here is to preserve and protect. So if we continue to do that, what happens is you start to alter the landscape, you start to deplete the resources, and there are many examples in decades prior to that law where there was significant damage to the property because of stuff like that happening. So that's like a real thing. So just keep that in mind. All right, next question.
Adam said, my niece wants to be a park ranger. I've heard some people have to apply or take a test multiple times. Do either of you have any advice?
USAjobs.gov is the website. Yeah. My start was as an intern. You can contact a park directly if you like and try to get in as an intern, which they will often be open to, which will then connect you to the system. But it is a little bit of a maze to get through. That is true. But to be a Park Service ranger, I don't remember having to take tests. There are some tests that are basic skills tests on the job application, but you come on site and as an intern, they trained me, and then they monitored my programs, and then I became a park ranger, which of course there's always training. There was research time to research my programs in the park archives, which is, by the way, accessible to the public. You just have to set an appointment free of charge. You can come check it out. And so I built more programs over time that were monitored and approved, but you're doing your own work. So there was no test per se. Now, to be a licensed battlefield guide, which I believe only Gettysburg does. I don't know if other parks do that.
There are other. Vicksburg has a site, of course, but Antietam has them. They're administered a little differently. But Gettysburg is one of the only ones that we have here, with the federal government auspices of doing it, government doing part of the testing of it. A little bit different at some of the other places.
And the guides do have a test, but that's different. They're not park rangers. They're not federal employees. They're licensed by the National Park Service, independent contractors. That has a test, so you can enter, and then you're your own thing that's contributing to the experience here at Gettysburg.
Yeah, Chris Quinn, the Chief of Interpretation Education here, oversees The seasonal rangers that are here and a lot of the frontline rangers, they undergo extensive interpretation training here, and many of them spend a long time here going over the history of the battle. I'm seeing them retire after all the years I've been here. Many of them that I've known over many years. I got a little nostalgic because one of them who's been here as long as I have, over 30 years, just recently retired here. So there's a great core staff here for the National Park Service and our partner organization, the Gettysburg Foundation. Tremendous, dedicated people here to help see to the preservation and interpretation and tell everybody why this is a significant place.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yes, the next one is for Brandon. Or I'm not sure if Brandon's still on or not.
Okay, but go ahead. We have it.
So Brandon, so Jamie had a question for Brandon. How did you rehab the walls and ceilings? Were they plaster originally?
So the walls and ceilings are actually all brick and plaster. And so, yes, we did rehab all the brick. I'm going to give you an idea all the way up to the 3rd floor. If you could see that, it was a lot of brick and a lot of masonry we had to rehab, as well as all the plaster inside the walls. There was some different plaster on top of them. So yeah, it was a whole lot of work, as you can see here, to rehab it. Yeah, just a lot of application stuff, a lot of stone and concrete.
Brandon, when you guys go watch that episode with Brandon in it, you will see a lot of photos of the restoration work. And I will also include a link to the organization that he's talking about that is in the building. So you can follow along on there as well. And then, like I said, check out the photos. Now, fun side note, I know we have some Rotarians on here. I met Brandon thanks to a Rotary program. He was presenting for my Rotary Club. I was fascinated by the work that he did. I've been around this stuff a lot, guys, and he really jumped out at the quality of work he did and the way he was able to connect and revitalize and make the past so relevant to being used today, and with the types of companies he was working for, these legacy companies, helping them innovate today. So he's a great business person and a historic preservation person. So I went up to him and talked to him afterwards, and we had a great conversation. And very short and very quickly after that, he was all of a sudden on the TV set recording an episode with me. So it's a really great one to see, and you'll see much more about their building and the photos on there as well.
Okay, so
Other
that
questions?
was all the questions I saw in the chat. If someone else has a question, they can come off of mute and ask it.
Awesome. All right, guys, if anything else comes up, you can reply to the email that I send out, which will have some follow-up links that I described. You can reply back with some questions. If you have an additional question for Wayne or Brandon, reply back and send it to me, and I'll get it to him, and we'll connect you all. Thank you so much for watching it.